The main tip I have for all bass players: don't get bored. When you get bored, bad things happen. This video is part 3 of my new series where I break down how I wrote a production music track from start to finish. It started with acoustic guitar and the original idea, then drums, and today's bass. On this particular song, I used my P bass. Here it is. I don't know exactly what model this is. They changed the names recently, but it's the American-made version. Professional? I'll look that up, but I think it's the Professional. Why a jazz bass and a P bass? Most of the bass players that I really like have a jazz bass and a P bass. And it's been that way since I got into this business. And so that's how I made my decisions. And when it comes to amps, the Ampeg B15 seems to be the one that wins out. More on that later. Of course, there are thousands of different other manufacturers, but when it comes to the music that I like, I go by the people who play the type of music that I like, and I make my decisions accordingly. Instead of focusing on the actual part, because it's super simple, it's a lot of half notes and eighth notes. But instead, I want to focus on the sound, starting with the bass, through the pedals, Kemper, and into the computer. But I'm going to reach down here and grab a cable. This cable is always at the bottom of my rack, and it goes up around the back into an SP compressor. Good time for me to tell you this. This signal path is not set up for bass entirely. It's set up for my electric guitar and also for other keyboards that I have. If this was just a bass signal path, I would probably make different choices. And I'm sure there are compressors and drive pedals that might do a better job with this bass. In fact, I'm always open to being told that I'm wrong and that I can do things better in the comments. So now is a very good time if you think I need to buy something to enhance what I'm doing. There's a selector switch that has 3 different settings: high, medium, and low, which I believe is for the attack. When you flip through the different settings, yes, it sounds different, but really what it does is it changes the way you get sound into the compressor, the way that it feels, and so you make adjustments. So it's hard for me to do an A, B, or C comparison in this case. But I keep it somewhat moderate. Bypassed. Back in. After that, I'm running through this ZVEX drive pedal. I'm sorry, but I refuse to say the name. They need to grow up. I basically always have that pedal on, and I adjust it if I want to send more to the amp or less to the amp, but it usually stays on. I could probably take it out of the signal for my cleanest path and then bring it in only when I need it, but it's just always set that way. Then I'm going through a tremolo I've never used on bass. Maybe I should, especially sped up. Maybe. And then it goes into the Kemper. But I have one amp that I use all the time, and it's from the Amp Factory. It's TAF Amp Pig BE15 Clean. So if I want to dirty it up a little bit more instead of switching profiles, I'll just increase this. That's too much. I want to get the sound as far as I possibly can, but I also want to leave some room to add more processing in the computer, especially if I'm recording multiple songs at one time. This is what it sounds like when I bypass the amplifier and this stack and the EQ and basically bypass everything in the Kemper. There is a certain character that comes with the amp sound that I love. But for years, I went straight into the computer with a direct clean signal, and then sometimes would add guitar rig to that with the bass amp simulator, or I would duplicate it. I know Logic's got great amp simulators, but I found this works for me, and I've got the Kemper, so I'm going to use it. For this particular project, I wanted to try something different. I normally use round wound strings, but this time I went with flat round. Round wound is what I usually use. This time I went with flat wound strings. I don't want to get too specific, but this feels more like a solid piece of wire, whereas the round wound strings it's wound. I'll put a picture up. So there's definitely a smoother tone. I wanted this to have more of that old school, thumpy, mellow sound. So I put these strings on it. You may have noticed that on this bass, I've got a little something under the strings. A random piece of foam that I found in one of my cases. What I'm about to demonstrate for you is also difficult to A/B test because it affects the way that I play the instrument. So without it, it's a nice sound. There's a nice sustain to the instrument. But when I add this, I can feel that the strings are a little tighter. And it also adds more of the thump, the attack. And if I move it way up here, real dramatic. Back here. Without it. Some of you may think that sounds terrible. Why would you do that? One of the reasons is curiosity. I've always wanted to try it. Some of my favorite players use something similar to this. And also, that's the beauty of a production music album, is you can make a choice. I can pretend to be a bass player that uses this kind of setup, and that's that person's sound. And I can embody that person for this entire project. That was my goal. With the drums, I used the soft beater and the broomsticks, and I chose instrumentation that I don't normally choose. I gave myself restrictions that I had to follow, and this was one of them. I had to learn how to play and make this work, and I really dig the sound. And now, moving forward, I have experience with this sound. It's in my toolbox. I can pull it out whenever I need it. There's different types of tone you can get with your thumb. The fleshy part of the finger. And then my fingernail. That sounds thinner on its own, but oftentimes in a mix that will cut through, and I might need to boost the low end. But especially when I'm playing eighth notes with the nail. Without the nail. Oh, I should play the same note. And of course you can use a pick, but I don't have one on my desk. Everything else is on my desk that you can't see right now, but I don't have a pick. Let's listen to my jazz bass. Much different sound. Round wound strings this time. Significant amount of sustain. More of a throaty sound instead of a thumpy sound. Active components. No top end at all. Cut all my bass out. More than anything, this bass makes me play different. This is an active passive switch. Bartolini pickups and a bridge that is spelled B-A-D-A-S-S. And as a young kid traveling around to churches playing music, I learned to call it the badass. And it's also got a drop D switch. The other bass was in drop D. The song is in D, and it made sense and sounded great. Much different vibe. Would it have been okay for this? Probably so, but I'm happy that I got the P bass. Options are good. Bass is one of those instruments that I feel insecure if I'm just noodling around. I don't know any of the cool bass licks. But when the drums start going, I feel really good about what I'm able to do. Play with the kick, keep it simple, be melodic when necessary, but most of the time, especially in production music, that's not all that necessary. And, you know, a beginner tip, say you're going from a D to a G. Well, you've got your third, your F sharp in there, and your A close by. So sometimes I'll simply work those notes. Pickups or something simple like that. Or let's say I want to go up to the 5 chord, which is an A, get a little something like that. The main tip I have for all bass players, don't get bored. When you get bored, bad things happen. I was nervous that I wouldn't have much to talk about because it's bass. It's pretty straightforward. Compressor, maybe a drive pedal if it's there, a good clean amp signal either from something like a Helix or a Kemper, or just go direct in and then process it with an amp simulator inside, or don't even use an amp simulator at all. You can get by without that. Bass has been recorded in so many different ways. There's not really an acceptable way to do it. It's whatever sounds good and whatever works for your track. So use your ears and make the best decision you can. We still need to talk about mandolin, lap steel with benders, and how I mix the track. So check back soon. Take care.